Good evening,
Hello.
late evening, good morning, and good afternoon from here. We are here in triplicate today. I found a new button on the browser, which means that this is a format we haven't seen before, isn't it? It's so nice to be back. I'm laughing because Kate's like trying to jump out of the picture. We'll get her out of the picture in a second, don't worry. Goals for today, or ambitions for today. To be as succinct as Steiner, we will not achieve that. I am sure we're far too wordy for that. But hopefully, we'll create a bit of richness around what Steiner creates, like in these really crystal clear conceptual lines. And so the overarching goal is to take us on a little bit of a journey of what we've won through studying this book, and also a review of the final chapter plus concluding remarks from the book, which are particularly poignant. And Kate's going to lead us in on the journey because we've all chosen pictures that we wanted to focus on. There'll be a little bit of text, but not nearly as much text as we've had in previous videos. So I'm really looking forward to this. It's been a wonderful journey, and let's see. Let's take that to do that final. Is it final 100 meters or the final lap or whatever it is? So, Kate, you've chosen a couple of pictures which for you are emblematic of something.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about it.
Okay, well, I'm not going to be succinct. I'm going to start by kind of summarizing what I've listened and gleaned from your last two videos, which I wasn't in. Especially the last video was really about, well, it really brought home for me how I don't have to be succinct, because it would be better if I was myself and I worked and created with concepts in the way that I can, because in that way I dig the root of a particular way of the way my eye mirrors the given, and I work out all its nooks and crannies, and I dig deeper and deeper and deeper into that. And that is what philosophers do so well and so bravely. And sometimes, they maybe have their first principles in the wrong order, which means, that the root kind of tangles up on itself, and it's it contradicts itself. But each philosopher that you talked about last week in that football match, they had to really work out and craft, like a craftsman, concepts and ideas to make reality more clear, because when someone is wrong, reality is more clear. If no one was ever, you know what I mean? So these roots tangle into the ground and build up the world tree of meaning that we've been building. And what Steiner does is he goes, okay, yes, these are all valid, and there's also something useful in each one, and especially in the play of worldviews, which Angus is going to talk about a bit later. We need to have all of them, because we don't have eyes to see all around our head conceptually or visually. We need to have points of view to develop, and that's as the evolution of consciousness goes on, these ideas are getting stronger and stronger and stronger. But the problem is that no one is going to the beginning. And I think the reason no one goes to the beginning is because the beginning is tiny, like a seed. The beginning is the fact that we split reality into the given and the concept, or our activity. Artificially, we split it and then we reunite it, and that action is done so much and is so innate And it's a process. It's not a point. It's not something that you can hold, because it's happening constantly and it's renewed constantly. And it's inherent in knowledge that it's a difficult thing to see. And I wonder, and Steiner did see it. And that is why his writing is very succinct, because he's trying to bring us back to that seed phase before we get into the roots. Because you can't start a plant. You can start some plants with roots, but the analogy goes so far. But
yeah.
So that's what I really got out of the Fichte conversation. It's just and it's just
And does that relate to one of the pictures you've chosen?
Yes. So the first picture is from the movie The Miracle Worker, which is about Helen Keller, and there's Helen Keller realizing what water is for the first time. Well, she knows what water is, obviously. I don't know how old she is here, but it's very interesting to think about being deprived of learning about concepts in the way that you can if you have audio, like if you have hearing or vision. If you have neither of those things, it's interesting to imagine what concepts feel like for you, because the given is much less, it's much more difficult to artificially separate what is given to you as an experience, because touch is much more immediate, And so the amazing thing is she finds out that this sign that her teacher puts in her hand means water, and she understands suddenly. And as soon as she understands that, she asks her teacher, what is this? What is this? What is this? And the teacher signs it and tells her. And it's this most joyous, like exhilarating, apocalyptic experience for this girl. And what that made me realize was that we can't have concepts without other people. We can have concepts without other people, but they're not useful, or they don't actively create the world until we share them with someone else, until we can have an agreement about a concept. I mean, this blind girl probably knows what water is. She recognizes it, and she, by her feeling it, all the things that water is, its coldness and its wetness, and sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. She would recognize what water was, but she didn't have a way of knowing that other people recognize what water was, and that other people have a stable concept of water.
Yeah.
And how amazing when something that is kind of dimly felt in you and kind of instinctively recognized, it's given something transparent where you can use it to form a stronger idea. And I think that's why I chose that image, because I don't know, it comes back to these concepts that the philosophers in the last video were working out. All of them they really necessarily needed to be worked out. They don't need to be taken as law, but they really needed to be muddled through and worked out and fought for and argued for as best as possible, and to convince, or because it doesn't matter if you agree with the concept, but to know that someone has knows what you're talking about, to know that the concept exists in another person's mind, whether or not they think it's useful or not, is relieving, because that also reveals how the mind is continuous with the world. It's not this like hermetically sealed place that is separate. It really is like fungus being, they're all connected to the earth, and they all fruit, and they all have tiny little mycelial roots that are connecting to each other. Yeah. And so it doesn't mean that we all have the same ideas immediately, but there is something in the experience of a shared concept, which is so miraculous, which points to what I think the epistemological conclusion talks about.
I've got something I really want to add there, but Jeff, would you like to add something?
Go ahead.
it to do with what you're talking about there, Kate. It's so important, and it's one of the things that Steiner says one of the biggest challenges for philosophy will be recognizing that the concept of triangle that I have in my head is exactly the same concept of triangle that you have in your head and that Jeff has in his head. True communion only happens conceptually. So when we actually, the most subjective thing we ever do is perception. And it's like when we have that conceptual clarity and we know the other person, it's like also has that same conceptual clarity, that's when we truly unite with something. And then at a higher level, when you're looking at communities as well, creating themselves, this is what's binding them together. So like the same concepts and ideas around whatever questions are important for them. When a community feels like there's this tight-knit understanding of a certain area of life, then the people are drawn together. They feel the nearness of that, but it's not in the world, it's in their conceptual union, as in, so like they are united in their thinking, and then that gives rise to like further developments. I think it's so these mysterious phrases that we heard from the philosophy of freedom, they're taking on like these, it's like even more significant nuances. So like having worked through this book, and I think you're touching on one of the key ones there when you were telling us about Helen Keller and her experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Yeah, Helen Keller is interesting, but this movie is very beautiful, because it's very violent, and the experience of concept is violent for her, and that's why it had an effect on me, and I saw it recently, and I connected it to what we're learning, what we're studying. I think it doesn't really connect to the image, but the other thing that you won from the last video was the importance of getting your first principles right. And I would argue we're not bothering about first principles in the first place. I mean, because a principle is something that's stuck and you have to defend, and the reality of consciousness and how it evolves means that any principle is just like a useful metaphor that you're using for the time being. But what Steiner does is he looks at the process, like at the phenomenon, and he trusts that his perception is not mistaken, which is a radical thing. And so it's that you don't have to argue for either all self or all given. That these are two realities that, as we are embodied, we experience as separate, and that is necessary for knowledge to reunite them together again. And it's interesting because, I mean, I understand the skepticism as well, because it is really contingent on other people. The word for water we have to agree on, and we have to agree that we can translate it with, a triangle is a bit different. Water, I mean, you have to translate it between the languages and the experiences that people have. So the idea that is the only constant truth, so objective, is, I can see as that could be kind of confusing for people. Like the concept of water being more objective than the perception of it, it kind of requires that you trust in your experience to believe that, or to have faith in that proposition. Is you really need to have trust, don't you think?
Jeff, go on, say you were smiling knowingly or nodding knowingly there. Jeff, go on.
Oh man. Well, that was beautiful, Kate. Thank you. Does that scene end with Helen signing the word love into her teacher's hand,
She asks who she is.
and then she touches her on the cheek? It may
Yeah,
as
and
well
then
have
they-
been. It may as
Yeah,
well
and
have
then
been the
they-
concept of love.
hmm They trust each other, and they are in a
They
bond.
know each.
After
They know
they
each
know
other.
each other. Yeah.
And the concept binds them in the way that you're describing. It may as well have been love, but
Yeah.
By any other name, right?
hmm
Yeah, that's really all I have to say about that.
Thanks. Shall I put the picture back up?
Do you have anything to add, Angus, before I go to my next picture?
It's actually it could be said for what you were just saying there, but I'll save it for the seventh seal, which you're just about to launch into.
I do.
Okay.
So I think that what you've done here is elevated the concept to, and that's what we got at last time, is that we sort of have neglected concept and idea within this epistemological process, from thinking to cognition, to the engendering of the self that cognizes, and the role of the transparent concept is so important in this process, and that we tend to over intellectualize concepts, and when we do that, then concepts become a weapon. Right? They don't necessarily become a weapon, but they're sort of a default blunt instrument, say, that we
They become heavy.
use to, in the way in which we manipulate nature, the nature of things. And I deeply respect and love that you've brought in the respect for all of these thinkers, and they had to work through these concepts, and they had to work through these concepts, and they had to work through the concepts. But I don't, me, I've got to bring up the dark side a little bit, because concepts are also these things that we build up into ideologies that then, when Angus was talking about when we're of like mind, we have such a desire to be connected that we will lose ourselves in a barrage of concepts, and this is a time that I guess now this leads into the second picture, and I just want to like-minded people are dangerous, just to themselves and to the world, but at the same time, like-mindedness, when it touches on something universal, transcends that need for ideology. So
before you go to that second picture, because Jeff, you highlighted something Kate said, and then it's like then something else popped out when you talked about elevating concept and idea. Steiner says to us that basically, if Hegel had sort of like understood what he's mapping out in this book, the activity of thinking which creates concepts and ideas, then, now I'm paraphrasing here, but there would be no difference. The fundamental difference between Steiner and Hegel, according to Steiner himself, is that he recognizes the activity of thinking as that, whereas what Hegel has done, he's taken concepts and ideas already pre-existing and tried to beautifully, so like bring them together as just like to describe the world, which is what you should use concepts and ideas for. Absolutely, they should be adequate descriptions of the world. But Steiner's going that level deeper, isn't he? That level deeper that Hegel didn't get to. But Hegel's work was instrumental for Steiner to be able to achieve what he did end up achieving.
Yes, from an epistemological point of view, right?
Yeah.
And he makes clear that in Philosophy of Freedom that there are other routes to get to, routes, I should say, not to confuse Kate's beautiful picture of the routing system. But there are other routes to get to the face, so to speak, to get to the connection. But this was the surest one, right? Because it's building up a reality, and you then concepts become not something that are just abstractly created, but that they're part of it, the reality that we're creating as we're creating ourselves, who are agents within those concepts, looking out the window of those concepts into the world, and cognizing, and then understanding what it is we're seeing. And so what I wish to say isn't just that epistemological process, but the process that has us creating a reality that's new to the world each time we endeavor to do what Kate was suggesting, is to grapple with concepts knowingly.
Yes, knowingly, because you can become blind and addicted to concepts too. You really can. And you can become addicted to framing reality in a particular way to satisfy your your presuppositions?
Characterological dispositions, is that?
Yeah, and your characterological disposition, yes.
Yes, and then you end up with Yuval Harari, right?
Yeah, well,
Yes.
I hope that's not his character.
Well, I
hope.
I don't know what drives him, and I wouldn't presume to know, but what he's doing is monstrous.
Yeah.
But we will strive to know. We will. That's one of our projects for the future. Sorry, Jeff, I'm going to have to ask this random question, seeing as you're talking about routes and routes. Do the Americans say Route 66 or Route 66?
I get my kicks on Route 66.
That's what I thought. So why do you call it a route?
Because I wanted to. It's also what we say is if you're going map out a route, you don't map out a route.
Okay.
Right? We generally, not all exclusively, but when we use the pronunciation route, it means that we're meaning to we're planning to do something. We're mapping something out, a route we will take. The route I will take is Route 66.
Okay, good.
That's funny.
And then I'll get my kicks.
So, Black Death, Kate.
Okay, yeah. Another movie that I watched recently that touched my heart. This is The Seventh Seal, and this is the main character, who is a soldier coming back from the Crusades, and he is having a chess game with death. He's trying to strategize with death, basically, and he's quite lost because he has a lot of questions about why, and he's faced with the abyss and that sort of thing. But what I loved about this film was that he saves the fools. There are these characters, you can see them in the background, and they are the fools of the film. And they live a very simple existence, and he becomes acquainted with them. And he realizes that his chess game with death is going to kill other people in his life, because death always wins and he gets what he wants. But he doesn't want these simple folk to meet that fate. And so what he does is he cheats, basically, or he turns the chessboard over to give himself an advantage quickly so that he can save these people in this game. And I kind of occurred to me the idea of strategy and play and the difference between that. I'm not advocating that we cheat games, but there is something in the gesture of these are the rules, and a being like death, I can't actually be won against if I play by his strategy, because he is but I can freely play with the concept of the strategy. And that is when, and the fact that he also does it out of love was brought home to me. And so I connected this image to the practical conclusion part of the end of this Truth and Science, because he makes it clear that the way we decide to engage with the world, our actions, are only as effective as our understanding of the laws behind them. And that I think that especially when you realize the law of love behind your deed, that is when you can create a new reality. Does that make sense? So you can play by the rules, and then you can also change all of reality when you realize that you are making the rules. And this part is not as clearly defined as my Helen Keller image. I just feel like there's something there. And it was really touching to me and really satisfying that the film presented that storyline, because I hadn't seen it before, but it was something that I really believe in the fools, and that they shouldn't come to a bad end. And so I was happy that they didn't. And I thought that there was something really true in it. And what I get out of the practical conclusion is that actually, and this will come up in maybe my next picture, which is something that I drew, that the subjective experience of reality, when it is transformed into an objective one with concepts, that objective reality also has the paths that you can take within it. The objectivity reveals where you can move and where you are free to do things. When you have correct concepts about the given, to unite with the given, you can interact with those well. And so concept making is actually it's really not in here, but actually in what you are doing when you're interacting with the world, how you use the world, and how you give to the world and how you receive from the world is your making of concepts, and it justifies your concepts, and it plays with the rules that you had. It plays with the strategy, and you are not bound to those concepts when you are making them in your actual will. Oh, this is reminding me. I read a lecture about the forming of the human heart by Rudolf Steiner. And he talks about how before the change of teeth, a child, all of its movement is actually an extension of its sense perception. The body trying to pull in and make sense of the world through its movement. And we know this from toddlers and how they need to crawl. And it's not about movement and will as much as it is about sensing the world. And I think that in another lecture Steiner says, which I find so true, I don't really know that all nerves in the body are sense neurons. There's no distinction between motor and sense. The motor is an extension of the sensory. And it's true, because we move to get more information out of the world. That's what we're doing when we're moving around, especially in our biped opposable thumbs. We have as much motor freedom as possible to get as much information out of the world as we can. Everything is sense. I feel like I'm falling away from this image that I've chosen, but I'm glad that I chose it anyway, because it brought me here. And I will stop there.
Well, there's so much there, Kate.
There's too much.
Not too much. No, not too much.
No. It's enriching it, isn't it?
There's a lot to unpack. Let's say that's what they say in these spaces. It's very rich.
There's a lot. It's very rich, and it's very tangled, and I don't have the skill of.
Well, that's what we're all here to do, right? So, first of all, this movie's called The Seventh Seal, right?
Yeah.
Which is an interesting concept. Also, an interesting concept is he's coming from the Crusades, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I assume that he was fighting for the state, for the church.
Yeah, he was fighting for the church
in the name of love, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
That so much blood was shed in the name of Christ, right? And then he, on his journey away from that, he meets death, and to some extent overcomes death, outwits death, or knowingly understands something about death. I just find that very interesting imagery in and of itself, and the irony of it.
Yes, he never understands what he wants to understand about death, and he never overcomes it for himself, but he can for these foolish characters, these circus performers that give him this kind of respite from his moodiness for a nice scene where he's just in the beauty of the world. And I suppose that experience leads him to want to prevent them from being tangled up in his own pursuits of trying to cheat, basically win and understand death. And death is, well, I can't give you any answers, and I can't tell you who God is, and I can't tell you what's going to happen when I take you. That's not my job. I'm just here to take you. And so that's very futile, but he's still able to win, just not for his own sake. But it is his own sake, isn't it? It still is, because yeah. So it's so satisfying. It's such a satisfying story.
Which lecture then? So you described this picture, and then you went into this. You were inspired to think about the way the human heart is formed in the nervous system, what the nervous system's role is. Which lecture is that?
Well, the nervous system one, I cannot remember. Yeah. But in the heart lecture, which I found in a golden blade, let me get it.
Well, we can put it in the notes too.
Yeah,
the reason why I ask is that Rudolf Steiner said two things about society and culture in the evolution of consciousness and the destiny of humanity wrapped up in these two concepts of the heart and the nervous system. And one was that we would not evolve if we continued to refer to the heart as a mechanical pump. Yeah. The heart is not a pump. That's the famous phrase. And I think that cardiology and neurocardiology that's being practiced as science actually is coming to this conclusion. It doesn't have the concepts to describe what the heart's role is, but it's obviously a spiritual organ. As we find out in the practical conclusion, because all deeds are universal deeds, and if the rhythmic system and the metabolic systems aren't deeds, I don't know what is. So there's that, and then there's he also says the same thing, that this is a sort of scourge of a notion that blocks our route our route toward making the connection with the universal. If we insist on this notion that there's two separate nervous systems, that there's this motor and sensory nervous system. So these are two warnings he he gives. I don't know that we're going to overcome the latter, but hopefully.
I didn't know about the latter. The lecture that is just called The Human Heart and was given in 1922. I will maybe send it to you, Angus, and people can
I'll post
put it, and they can read it if they want. And if I ever find when I read about the nervous system, I will put it in the comments. But I think it's just more of just a concept that I stuck with because I really felt that it could be obviously perceived, that the motor, and it because I'm learning anatomy at the moment, which I love, I'm enjoying it very much, and this is why I read this article, because we were learning about cardiovascular system, and I was learning about this like electrical node that is supposed to start the pulse. There's just like this little bit of nerve tissue in the heart that apparently, it's just its job to just start pumping. And you ask the teacher, and it's just its job. It's this is what it is, and it's one of those things where you go, I'm really enjoying learning about the human body, and then you come against one of those questions which can't be answered. It's just like, well, we've just decided that is.
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating, but it doesn't lead you to more questions. And it's the same with the nervous system. What do you mean there's just a strip of the brain that controls this part of the body and the strip of the brain that controls this? That sounds very silly. It sounds very arbitrary. And I don't believe that. And you can show me all your MRIs. It doesn't mean anything to me because it doesn't feel rooted in the reality that I experience, where everything is meaningful and happens because of something and for something, not just because it does, not just some accident. Yeah.
I'm going to one reflection from my side. I really do like the fact that you brought in culture, art, film in this case. It's got this really important role. Art can either take us deeper into the illusion, it's like we lose ourselves in it, or it can also be a revelation of something deeper. And what when we're describing it like the theorists are doing, what we hope we're doing is finding how it is a revelation of deeper truths about ourselves as thinking human beings, and that in itself raises this whole question to a level. That the importance of art, it has, we talked about koans last week, this contradictory nature, and here also in art we find that contradictory nature. It is something which can either draw you away from deeper truths, lead you deeper into the illusion, or it can be that where you actually find these deeper truths hidden. But what is also clear, the relationship of that question to this book is this concept making activity that you were talking about, Kate, that we have to exercise. If we don't create these concepts within ourselves, we won't recognize them in the film. So, for example, somebody coming from a completely different perspective might just say, these are two black and white films. They're past their sell-by date. Why should I watch them? There's nothing of value in there. And that type of attitude is a reflection of the level of conceptual activity that's going on in that person. And it's true for him or her. But it's not a statement of ultimate truth. Far from it. But I do think it's the wonderful thing about art, culture, film is it's this playful element where you're trying to these invisible concepts that are so slippery, so difficult. They're using the Luciferic element to become something more real, something slightly more tangible, which we can then use to explore more deeply these concepts. So it's really nice that you brought them in there. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad that I like a good film. I like a good song. I like something that touches truth but isn't finished. And the themes or the ideas that were in this film touched my feelings in that kind of way that I trusted that they had something to do with the pattern of thought that was going on in me at the moment, as I'm studying these things. And you don't even have to dismiss the film altogether. You could watch The Seventh Seal and think it's the fact that his mission is doomed and the only one that survives is the fool you could take that as a parable for the absurdity of life. But I don't. I take it as a parable for the power of love in breaking apart the laws we put on ourselves. And, and both of those things are valid, just like the roots. I mean, that's, like you said, it's what's good about film, because it's, especially a film, because there's so much going on.
Yeah.
And it's very hypnotizing because of the way that it kind of mimics our mental picture making. And it does it for us. It's so satisfying. I'm sure that Rudolf Steiner would not approve of cinema.
No, he said, I could give one example. Jeff might be able to give another one, but he said that cinema, it's a wonderful medium for conveying the idea of reincarnation and karma. I remember that clearly. So it's not all bad. I mean, like with our football match.
It's like what you said about
Lucifer. There is no pure evil. There is no pure bad. It's recognizing the limits of each one of the thinkers we've looked at, or in this case, the medium. Film is a wonderful medium for conveying certain things, and it's the killer of the killer of thinking from other perspectives.
Absolutely. But I'm a very images are very powerful for me, and images I used to navigate a lot of things, so I think that's natural for me to choose films. I also love these, so if anyone wants to watch a good movie, I recommend these two.
Okay, so talk about images. These are the next two images.
Oh yeah, so this is what I was talking about in the act of generating a concept. You're engaging with the world, so you're already using will. You're already you're already changing the given to become something more objective, but it's you that is doing it. You're like your agent in that process. So in the first image, is the subjective experience of the given, and some of it might be correct, but it's just sense impressions, and there's nothing to draw it out. And in the second image, when the figure understands his environment, in understanding his environment, he's already active in it. He has made his path through it by understanding it, which I think, and when I drew this, I was thinking about like psychedelic experience and how it's very subjective, because it's actually your mind, sort of your concept and the given not joining in the way that you're used to. That's what I would say the psychedelic experience is. And if you can master that or approach it in the right direction, you can break apart concepts that don't serve you. Sure, that's what people use it for. But I think most of the time what you've done is you've split that thinking apart. And so the given world is just way more dreamlike, and you can't make much sense of it. So reality is the best drug, kids, because that's when you actually have the freedom, when you know what's in front of you. As there's nothing like that, no trip like it. But the idea was just that the reciprocal nature of both understanding the world and acting in it. You can't have one without the other. They're the same thing from different directions. You have a understanding of something in whatever we call this mind, but by doing that, you're already acting in it. I mean, a child has to engage, play, touch with the world to understand it. Well, it's not actually, that's a bad way of saying it. That's the way we say it. But I would say by playing, the child is understanding. It's not, I have to play so I can understand. Playing is their understanding.
It's a natural instinct, isn't it?
Yeah.
To do so. It's part of our essential nature to want to understand, and the tool for doing that when you're young, not just when you're young actually, but like when you are young, it's like the predominant tool is through play. It's a very important part of the process.
Yeah, through our actions and what we our awareness, our attention, and our intention and attention. You know, those are wills. That's a will activity. The thinking is tied up with activity. It's not something that is passive, and it is what you put your attention on is what you are intending. So that is what I was trying to convey in that image, that his path is his own openness to reality's objectivity. Whereas when you're just receiving without trying to make sense of it, you have no path forward, really. All you can do is just to receive. And
you become that passive. You become something passive, capable of receiving rather than understanding what's going on. But because we were talking about children there, it's like a reflection we've also made before, but I think is relevant here, is the importance of artificially recreating that play-like attitude to life. How that it's this idea of returning to the given, or sort of phenomenology, using the given as the stimulant for discovering something that was always there but that you have never seen before, because of the concepts. And how just as a random example, we've got some blueberry bushes outside, and I was really struck. It's beginning to turn a little bit autumny here, very slightly, and some of the leaves on the blueberry bushes, they're really rich red. And then you've got there's still plenty of green leaves, and then you've got some of these branches where they're also like this luminous red, but on the same branch, same tree itself, same bush. On the same bush, you've got other ones which are sort of like completely green still, and then you've got all the ones in between. And how I don't know exactly what the processes are going on there, and I could probably read about the physical processes, but just the experience of that mystery of, we've got this different phenomena going on in this bush. How is redness? Why is this redness? It's like affecting me sort of like differently from the greenness, and how am I seeing the transition? It's like in that the bush as a whole moving from this vibrant state to something which is sort of like more an autumn state, and to be able to marvel in that picture, it means dropping any. There's an advantage to dropping any conceptual clarity I might have about certain things, to just to absorb it in, and then suddenly these these new intuitions can come about, it's like, what is it a heat process that's going on in these leaves that are actually causing it to, it's like to burn up into this bright red. So that was this childlike ability, which Hartmann didn't like in Steiner. He said you can't do that. Is actually it's the fertile ground for more concept creating activity, which ends up making the world more experientially rich and understandable at the same time as well.
Mm.
Okay. And did you want to add anything, Jeff, or should we go on to your pictures?
No, yeah, I'm good to move on.
Good to move on there. Okay. Jeff's pictures. Can you see it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Yep. All right. Well, there's a couple of books. And as we know from Angus's picture last week, that books aren't just black marks on the pages inside them. So I chose these two as a way to sort of think about some of the concepts throughout this whole truth and knowledge experience that we've been going through together. And but first, I wanted to say that I think that the one weakness of truth and knowledge as a work is the degree to which he leaves out the nature of perception and the importance of the feeling life in relationship to the self. So I just want to bookmark that because I would feel like I was missing part of myself if I didn't mention it. Be leaving it behind somehow, and I don't want to do that in this process. I'm only to chapter 5 on the Schickler work, but Schickler is the one who brings this idea of the determining of the self, and the notion that we're in Western culture represented by Kant and Hegel, particularly how we have institutionally underdetermined the self in all of what we've been talking about. And so it would be a bit repetitive for me to talk about that, except to say that.
So, Jeff, can I ask you? I would like you to unpack a little bit this undetermined self, because you're correct. You've mentioned it a couple of times, like in previous videos, but I to my knowledge, you haven't really unpacked it, and I think it would be useful. I think it'd be really useful to hear that. So, please repeat yourself.
Well, it sort of relates to the chapter Fichte, because Fichte brings the human eye to the center stage and basically suggests that this is the foundation of all existence. Issues forth to some extent, or is the reality, which is in a sense an underdetermination of the I itself, because it puts it in a fixed and abstract place, say. And I think that this the whole work of truth and knowledge culminates in the practical conclusion chapter, which is a page and a half of printed material off the archive, say. And what I mean by the determined self is that we are self-determining beings, and as self-determining beings, we create concepts, we create we create within cognition, we create knowledge, we're the agents, we ourselves are the agents that live within this epistemological process. We receive thinking and we take it up in cognition, but at first we find thinking to be a part of the given that's not given. And yet we wouldn't have a self if it weren't for thinking. We wouldn't, and what I mean by underdetermined is that we think of that self as merely subjective or abstract, or a materialistically speaking, a sort of after effect, an artifact of the neurological processes, say, that are at work, and it's just an involuntary biochemical outgassing or something like that. Is the ways I've described it previously. Yet, if we don't treat that seriously and then describe, be able to institutionally foster that in our children, and in ourselves, and in our relationship with each other, then we have no agency as relates to the way in which we form the concepts that move us in our actions. And in the end here, he describes, in the practical conclusion, he describes the universal aspect of the human reality as basically deeds, actions. It's the thing that we can be in our head all we want, and we can identify with self all we want, but until that self acts through deeds in the world, we're not part of the universal process. We remain separate, and as a separate self, we're incomplete, and we are incomplete. So the self, I would determine the self, and I would determine it from an intellectual standpoint, and from I believe this is what we're doing when we wrestle with these concepts, and when we embody them through our action.
Can I ask a question there, Jeff?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is Schickler, is he German?
I believe he is.
Because
Yes.
it's interesting you've picked up on specifically these words, because, as you know, I read the German and the English. And one of the things that reading the German comes across in a completely, at a different level of clarity, concerns this word. Bestimmen in German means to decide or to determine. And it carries both of those meanings in the German, and in the English translation, the translator has been forced to choose between determine, determined, decide, decision. And in English, you select, it takes you away from this activity that's going on. And I remember, and we're going back a couple of chapters now, but I remember thinking, yeah, isn't it strange how this particular key aspect of determination is somehow more accessible in German, especially related to the decision-making process, and the tearing out of the given, all of these ideas. They form this whole within the German reading that an English person, somebody reading the English translation, will not see it immediately. It's it takes more effort for you to be able to see that, and so then when you've unpacked a little bit, it's the difference between the underdetermined and the determined self. I'm linking it back to what I was my thought processes when I was thinking about the difference between the English and the German. I don't know if I've conveyed anything of clarity other than an interesting thought process that happened for me as I was trying to make sense of, especially chapters 3, 4, and 5. This Bestimmung or Bestimmung.
Yeah, it's I think what you're saying is crucial because it's crucial. because it happens at the crucis point when you're faced with the given, right? And then that he says early on in this work, that given is going to be developmentally different depending on where you as a self are, how you've developed as a human being, how you have also well, let's just stay with developed, because there's an interesting now connection with development and evolution, say. And if you don't get lost in opaque ideological scientific concepts that are associated with evolution, you can start to see how the self, the development of the self, is linked with universal evolution as a whole. Now that sounds like human hubris, but
sounds poetic, I think.
It only sounds like it when you start to come into connection with it, and this is why it's a bit of an elusive thing. But the really important part here is that the soul is real. The soul is independent of spirit, and the soul is independent of the physical. The soul has a body. The soul has laws associated with it. The soul has an ontological realm that the world as a whole has elements of soul in it, say, or a activity of soul. We have the possibility of having an independent soul that is free. We can embody into our feelings so that they are sense perceptions, so that they are cognitive. There's cognitive continuity right down into our physiology. We can cheat death in this respect. We can replace our physiological, neurological processes with thinking. And in fact, thinking probably arises as a human individual experience. As part of the will, as part of the life forces that exist within us as living beings. So, but I want to go back because there's a point at which in this process he describes the need for creating an artificial differentiation between ourselves and the world. And not only are we creating an artificial differentiation, we're creating a provisional self that holds the space between the artifice and the real, say. And that creation is so crucial to the way in which we become embodied, so that we can reunify ourselves with the world through this ensoulment process, that to underdetermine that self, in other words, to decide not to determine the self institutionally, or to actually not to defy that, to not defy that culture of underdetermination, cognitive underdetermination, and not decide to take up the self and fashion it, to make it into something, to make it more and more real to yourself, so that determination is both cognitive and creative. It's the uniting of the cognitive and the creative. God, I think I got there, but I'm not sure.
You did. You definitely got there. Okay, you go first.
Well, I feel like that was a really good way of explaining, or that's what my image was trying to get at. That understanding is at the same time engagement in the world. And I don't know if you were gone when I said this, but I said, I first said play is the way children learn to understand the world, but then I corrected myself by saying play is their understanding of the world. It's the same. They're learning about the world through their action. We can only learn.
And you know, and I don't want to be a sycophant, but you know, with Rudolf Steiner, because we keep going, you know, what did Rudolf Steiner said, but he did say basically that
It has been said.
for adults, art is the play, right? The artistic process is play for adults, as analogous to say, or as in continuum with the play that children naturally, organically engage the world with. Just that we have to take it up.
You have to bring forth what is given.
Yeah.
I suppose as a child, the imagination is so present that it isn't as.
Well,
it doesn't require
doing it.
Yeah, they don't. Yes, yeah. It doesn't require a conscious decision to do so because the imaginative process is happening.
Which is why this is play, and which is why this is art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's no joke. Like, you know, play is serious business. John Vervaeke talks about serious play, and I respect that. I respect how he's come to that conclusion. But unless this self is real, that we're playing into existence, do you know? I mean, there's a reason. Isn't the word karma and drama, don't they share the same root in Sanskrit? I think it's Sanskrit. I believe they share the same root. Mm-hmm. And if all the world is a play, then play is the thing, right? And you know, yeah, that's all I really have to say about that. I think I'm in over my.
Two things I'd like to come in on there, and one is the in the film that Kate was talking about, the Seventh Seal. Sorry, these are all like traveling. It's a traveling theatre, isn't it? That's going around doing this. So they are doing their own. They are creating their own art, and then you've got like this. It's like meta question that I was like asking within that framework is this art? It's like useful, ennobling art, or is it like art that's like really like just leads you deeper into the illusion? That was just a reflection because of what you were saying there, Jeff. But this plays a serious business, and we are doing serious business here. I might have been at the beginning of this series, but I know somewhere when the three of us have been talking, I've said something along the lines of, I remember as a child like feeling somewhat sad that like the scientists of the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, they were hobby scientists, and they reconfigured the world. And so like, here's us you have to have billions of dollars and research programs, and you have to be such a specialist to be able to select to do anything, and they often don't do anything anyway. That's a little jab there. But this is to your point, Jeff, seriously, this is what we are trying to do. We are really trying to create clarity around concepts which are us. That's what we are. We're with these, I'm going to turn it a bit mechanical now. We are concept making beings. And that's what we're supposed to be. So that we can make sense of the world, so that we can enjoy the world. And then we can play with those concepts like children. And we can create art, we can create music, we can create films, or we can create conversation that will entertain people, so that where they feel stimulated, so that they feel, oh wow, I hadn't thought about it from that perspective before, but now I've got a slightly deeper level of clarity about it. And that's part of a scientific that's continuing this scientific process that the people of the Enlightenment were trying to. They were trying to create clarity about the physical laws that describe the world. what we're trying to do is to do that in the conceptual space. So in that sense, I think that's why, it's certainly for myself, and I suspect it might be the same for you guys as well. That's why this type of work is pleasurable. We enjoy what we're doing. We're playing here with ideas, trying to find different ways of communicating the joy that comes with creating clarity around this type of Steiner's thinking in this particular case, and watching this grow. It's a life-giving, it's an energy-giving process, which is why, Kate, even though it's 11:15, is it in your? I get you're not feeling
past.
quarter past. You're feeling like, actually, I should be tired, but actually I'm getting energy out of this. That's
Absolutely.
That's proof positive that we're doing something that feels healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. You get energy out of it. And it is a serious play, if we want to use that word. The only problem I have with that term is that I think the play of children is just as serious.
Yes, good
it's
point.
just not by our standard or our framing. But the conversations like this, engaging in liturgy, engaging in creative acts with my friends, making music, all of those things fill up my cup, as they say. Because, and it's not just enjoyable though. It's more than that, because it feels like a struggle. It feels like it's something that I'm contending with, and something that I'm slowly carving out to make a more real. It's not overgoing the same thing. Every conversation is new. That's why conversation is wonderful.
Yes. When I said serious, I meant my son does serious play. He's not serious about his play, however. Right? I mean, you know what I mean? Like we have to get, in order to be a funny adult, I've learned, in order to have a sense of humor and to provide wit in an improvisational way, which is play, you have to be serious. Right?
Yeah.
The best comedians were very serious people,
Think about life
and
carefully,
that,
don't they?
speaking of an art form, the truth tellers in our time are the comedians, the only ones brave enough to speak their mind and with some continuity. Dave Chappelle is hilarious, right? George Carlin.
He's
makes
brilliant.
me weep, right?
Yeah.
And the dire nature of the subject matter is serious, right? So yeah. And yes, it is serious. It's play is extraordinarily important in childhood, and it has to be maintained. And conventionally we don't do that, because we have ideological pictures of what knowledge is and what education should be and what human development is, or no picture at all about human development. Bizarre notion, right? I also wanted to say that I think when we were talking about play as in theater, I always think of Hamlet, and that the play is within the play.
Yeah.
That scene where the play is constructed in order to tell the truth underlying this whole.
The world's a stage where each and every one plays his part.
Yes, and the play is the thing. The play is the thing. Yeah.
In the Seventh Seal, when the traveling circus, they have a performance, and it's interrupted by this procession of people self-flagellating and crying and screaming and wearing crowns of thorns to try and appease the god because of the plague, and so that they are engaging in their own play in this protest. And the foolish, the silly play is kind of because they share the scene together, so they both seen in that they are creative framings of reality that aren't necessary but are created.
We'll have to do a whole program on this film. It sounds just utterly fascinating.
It's such a good film,
the just the irony of again, fighting a war, oppressing people in the name of Christ, in the name of love. It's just bizarre. And then,
and if you come over to Sweden, we can go. So it's a couple of hours down the coast from here. You can go to the beach scenes. They were filmed. It's like just south of here.
Lovely.
All right. Well, we'll see you soon.
See you there.
Yeah, world tour.
Shall I pick up the kicking away the ladder bit?
Go for it.
Yeah.
Okay. So we touched upon it, and it culminates, I think, in all of the work, all the epistemological work that Steiner did in relationship to the idealists. And this term, as I'd mentioned before, was a term that Wittgenstein brought to bear, and he wrote this extraordinarily difficult work on logic. I forget the name of it at the moment, but it doesn't matter. And then he basically said, forget about everything you just had to go through in order to get to this point. You have to kick away. Those were rungs on a ladder, and we have to kick that away in order to perceive what it is that it is that logic was meant to bring us to. We have to perceive it. And this is, yes, indeed. This is this is the moment that because Fichte's picture was to establish this free agent self, he lost the self and the free agency, because he perceived the self as the foundation of the world, as opposed to the conveyor of the world through thinking, through the thinking process, which involves will and involves feeling, which is inherently involved in this process. And so what we're doing is at play here is searching around for ways to develop the concepts to perceive the world with cognition, and it is a kind of kicking away of the ladder, and without kicking away the ladder, while depending on the concepts, that's how we fall back into ideology. So there's a reason why Marx picked up Hegel, right, and turned it into the Homo economicus picture of the world that had the state at the center as the representative of humanity somehow, right? And it's interesting to note that Hegel was deeply moved by Fichte's picture of it's like if we had the combination of Hegel and Fichte, we might have ended up with a psychology that understood, studied, and helped to foster the self. So that was the reason I chose that, because the self is the culmination of this work, truth and knowledge. It gives us our self back, or anew is maybe the better way to put it.
So a slightly targeted question with the title "Kicking Away the Ladder." What is the ladder that's being kicked away? Because correct me if I'm wrong, it's a reference to, is it Wittgenstein or Kierkegaard? Wittgenstein, so like the problem of language. Is that correct? Jeff?
You mean the work, the problem of language? Or the concept, the problem of language?
Okay, so I'm asking questions, I'm making statements. I'll make some statements, and then basically you like correct me if I'm wrong, or to like add. So my understanding is that Wittgenstein, he talks about the limitations of language, and that's sort of like that's why we can't get at truth, because language is inherently limited. And I think that's a really interesting discussion to have, because it even ties in with what Kate was talking about earlier, which was it's like that concepts aren't words. Concepts are concepts, and then we label them with words, and that's two completely different things. And so I think this is the weakness of Wittgenstein's. Wittgenstein sort of like got half the truth, and he's focused on that and not recognized sort of like how his argument is, how it's weak as well. He's like no, I can't think of an adequate metaphor just now, but he's focusing too much on one side and drawing too many conclusions from one side of the argument, which is true. So he's over extrapolating, like what his analysis is doing. But so the question to you, Jeff, is you've been reading Anne Ryan's book, Kicking Away the Ladder. What is the ladder that needs to be kicked away here, according to Anne Ryan?
I could be wrong about this, but I think it's logic. It's
Okay.
It's the use of logic to get to a certain point at which an organ of perception, as Fichte describes the birthing of something that occurred for him, which was a perception across the threshold into that which transcends language. And I agree with you, if Wittgenstein, and I'm not that familiar with Wittgenstein, so I don't want to come off as totally understanding Wittgenstein, or even partially for that matter. But if anybody speaks of language as metaphor, as representative, then they don't understand what concepts are. And that's understandable. As Bonnie Roy says in her conversation with Brendan Dempsey, one of the things we've where we've screwed up is what she says, is that
she uses the F word.
Yes, she does.
Naughty girl.
She
Twice.
basically says that that when we started to think in thoughts, right, and so this goes back to Kate and Helen Keller, right? When courage was embodied by Odysseus, say something like that, when it was mythologically embodied in a character, in a work of mythological epic poetry, say, then we were living into the reality. And when we started to say courage, and then believed that courage represented that started to believe the thought of courage as opposed to the actual act of courage, or the being courageous, and I agree with that. So, and there are real beings that represent courage. We don't have to have just mythopoetic. The countenance of courage in our time is the being of Michael. Is this not true? Right. So there's an actual being of courage that we can get to know behind the concept of courage, which is the way concepts then are brought back, resurrected, so that we're actually seeing the reality that we are in part creating. Because to have courage, we have to create what Kate refers to as the trust and faith within ourselves, in order to kick away the ladder of mere logic, of mere intellectual abstraction, but also create the concepts that make the rung of the ladder traversable, right? But the concepts don't go away, right? Each rung is a placeholder for the next rung.
Yeah. And that links into when they were talking about, oh, what do they call it? The MHC. Help me out. Can you remember, Jeff? This idea that Dempsey is trying to get across, which Roy's
model of hierarchical complexity.
Thank you. That's right. He's saying, but is there an orthogonal move from it? And the answer is Kate.
Yeah.
I can hear you. I'll hold on. Okay, I was hearing myself. I don't know if it came across really bad there. When she comes back, I'll let her back in.
Yeah, same thing happened here.
Yeah. So with the Roy thing, I've lost my footing a little bit. Model of hierarchical complexity. He's asking for this orthogonal move, and he's saying, "Where is it? Where is it?" And she's saying, "I don't know. I don't know. I don't know." It's here. This is what it is. It's what we've been trying to map out in this work. And when I think it was 2 videos ago when we did about Meister Eckhart, and I did a little bit about Nicholas of Cusa. I think also here we've got this idea that this is becoming so rich in my head that I'm struggling to pin it all down. But with Nicholas of Cusa and this recognition of learned ignorance, these type of concepts, a recognition that the conceptual thinking that we're doing is in itself an important step in being able to transcend it, and they're still stuck into what does this transcendence look like? And that's what I think we're finding here in Steiner, in this, in the true epistemology that's being mapped out here. They're not recognizing it. If they dug deeper into the activity of thinking, which is exactly what's been going on here, they would get the answer they are looking for. But at the moment, you can hear how they're skirting around it, and they're adding interesting, let's call them data points or descriptions or images to elucidate what they're talking about. But that uniting concept that Steiner details in this book, the activity of thinking, to my mind, is what's missing in their descriptions. And I think that that needs unpacking in a different video, but it's interesting that you bring it in here.
Well, I think it's totally relevant because what Bonnie lands on in this video, and also the one with Greg Enriquez, is the self.
Yeah, exactly.
Plain and simple. And so this is a very Fichtean move, right?
Perfect.
She's repeating Fichte, right? So this is interesting because as I mentioned, I believe that these characters, the idealists, are starting to gain momentum in our culture, and have always been there as in a kind of seed form. The way in which they've influenced. I mean, obviously, Hegel has influenced Marxism, and the way in which the modern democratic state is organized, right? So his conceptual framework was what Steiner refers to in spiritual science as a foundation for social forms, is a perfected picture of the state, right? And it's real. There needs to be a perfected picture of the state. However, we can't rest on these pictures. That the picture also needs to be one of imagination that evolves, that leaves room for thinking. And the other thing I wanted to say there is that I think one of the things we've won, and I think we can say, as this is a summary, this video is largely a summary, that what we've won is that we can't recognize thinking without cognition. It's the place, and he doesn't do this move in Philosophy of Freedom, and I don't know for the life of me right now why. Because it seems to me this can be developed, this idea that cognition is differentiated from thinking. Thinking is
I think he does. when he
Thinking is
talks about intuition is to
Okay.
thinking as.
Yeah, let me try this. then.
Sorry, Jeff. Yeah.
Thinking is that which runs through evolution and drives evolution. Cognition is the thing that we use as selves to develop as human beings. Right, because in the practical conclusion, he says that the deed is the universal, and the moral ideal is that which informs the deed. And so when you put them together, then the moral ideal is comes about because we have a self that cognizes and captures the thinking, like I don't want to be flowery about it. Yeah.
Go on, be flowery. Give us some
Okay, so
daffodils.
like color is the suffering and deeds of light,
Mhm.
so is cognition the suffering and deeds of thinking. In a self that is one, that is self-determined, that is thoroughly determined, that is thoroughly soulfully living in the world and more embodying in the world. So I think it's totally relevant.
I started to interrupt you there earlier. Apologies for that. I think we've got another one of those wonderful examples of when a concept is clear, you see it immediately. When we read The Philosophy of Freedom, we didn't have the same conceptual clarity that we have won through reading this book. Now, so I agree with you. It's not. This is the beauty and the importance of this book. This book really digs deeper into some essential topics that are talked about in the first 7 chapters. Sometimes they get mentioned on 1 or 2 pages, and we don't understand if we limit ourselves to The Philosophy of Freedom. There's so much going on there that we, if we haven't prepared ourselves, we can't understand it. But I am confident that when we go back and read The Philosophy of Freedom, when we look at the parts when he's talking about intuition is to thinking as observation is to perception, that is when you go, oh yeah, shit, now I understand that at a completely different level. And you know what? I am still that despite the clarity there, as those words pass over my lips, there is still a certain uncertainty about intuition is to thinking as perception is to observation, or observation is to perception. And that is a reflection of my own lack of clarity there. But I am convinced that when I go back to that chapter, is it chapter 3 or chapter 4, that will come to me in a completely different way because of reading this book. So I was both agreeing and disagreeing with you, and this is this koan-like nature of going on here. It's like, is art just for perpetuating the illusion, or is it to manifest the truth? It's both. It's both, and it depends on who's doing it and when they're doing it and why they're doing it.
Well, it's like cognition. It depends on if there's agency in it, because we will cognize. And most cognizing is done involuntarily in our culture, I would say. And I notice myself, when I'm worrying, for example, I have pretty dramatic events that have occurred in my life over the last week or so. And when I'm cognizing about them, but not thinking about them, then I'm not discovering the laws internal to those events. They're karmic events. They're people placed at different points at which everything came together for a certain event to occur. Whether I can see that or not is up to me. And my own limitations. And again, this goes back to if I don't have a developed self, then the clarity can't come to me. The revelation, the intuition can't come to me unless it's pure revelation by grace, say,
Yeah.
and suffering.
Can I work out what you're saying? So when you construct a framing of reality, when you cognize a particular way of sense making, that is cognition. And there's different ways that we can cognize, and a lot of philosophy is actually a way of cognizing taken to its extreme or taken to its richest. And all of it is informed by thinking, but it isn't thinking itself. And what people call thinking and get angry about is actually what you would call cognizing, and what they would call what you call thinking is something probably like intuition or feeling. Even lots of people would call it feeling.
Yeah.
But it's the lawfulness, and a lawfulness that is constantly evolving and being renewed, and that stream in reality is thinking. That lawfulness of
Yes, and he says that here. So in this work, he says he defines thinking, and he doesn't do that also in I mean, you have to discover it in Philosophy of Freedom, is what I hear Angus saying. He says it here that, and I'll paraphrase it. I'll say it in my own way. Maybe it's a claim I'm making. I'm not sure. Thinking is the relationship between things, between all existence. Cognizing is the realization of the relationship of all things in relationship to each other.
Yeah.
So
the self is the thing that cognizes and realizes. And then I like this term realize because it's related to self-determination, and the word determination and decide is that, as Vervaeke says, I mean realize in all of the ways in which one might realize, to become real, to actualize, and to cognitively understand. And I would go as far to say that thinking is the determining factor in the world. All things are determined by thinking. And then we do that through our thinking process in cognition.
Mm-hmm.
Well thought. Hegelian style.
Yeah, is it? Yeah, it's a sort of, that's what Hegel was looking at in that dialectical process. Is he was looking at thinking, but he didn't have a self to mediate it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so that it doesn't matter. So the thinking that happens between selves and the thinking that happens between history is the same. It's reduced to the same, almost, and it can become mechanical, which is what Marx could find in it. Then a human being is different from an animal in its cognizing, which is what I think you said last week or the week before, that the thinking has a mirror or a reflection in cognition in a human being. That's what separates us from animals. And that thing that yeah, not so much the I then, but the self. It makes me feel like that a human being doesn't necessarily have the I. The I is a possibility or a potential for a human being, but it isn't necessarily granted.
That's rich. That's a rich question. And what's the difference between the I and the self? Is there a difference? What's the difference between the I, the self, and the soul? I claim that cognizing happens in the intellectual soul. And to the degree that we are embodied in our intellectual soul, the degree that we have feelings in our intellectual soul, is the degree to which thinking flows through our self-awareness into a self-determining cognizing. And so that self is the I. And I think it's the I that it's the I that arises, is determined by thinking, and that it is our I that thinks, and it is our I that determines who the self is going to be, and that self is the lower I would say. I could be disputed on that, but that's my working experience. And one
To
is
me, the
potential,
soul.
and the other is the thing that creates the potential.
Yeah,
And the soul
the
is the
soul.
material.
That's
is
what I was
the
going to say. Soul
atmosphere.
and spirit are substance, like the body. They are bodies. They are processed substances to me. Whereas self is like a location of the tangles of my multiplicities of cognition. The self is the location, the individualized location of my potential to cognize in different ways.
And the being.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I'm seeing this very interesting image. I can't really draw it, but
I'm see if you agree with this one, Jeff. You said something which I'm not saying I disagree. I'm just saying I have a different picture, and who knows what the truth is, type of thing. But you said so, like our feelings are in our intellectual soul, and I have a slightly different relationship to that. I say it's like the I, which is in the intellectual soul. That same I is also in the sentient soul, which is the feeling reactions to things. And then so that picture is also the I is in the astral body, the I is in the etheric body, and the I is in the physical body, and that's where consciousness arrives. But it's like the I is in all of those. Is so that's the type of imagery that I use to describe it to myself.
yeah, I would say both I's are in one the potential I. I'm not sure that the I is in the physical body. I'm I think that that's the Christ act, was for the I to actually enter the physical body in order to overcome the chessboard and reascend through
Isn't
the
sense
sentient
perception
soul, through the
so?
sentient soul body, and that the seven wraths are what the Christ is contending with in that ascension, to bring in our conversation with Sophia.
It's yeah. And again, not saying that my picture is right. It's trying to reconcile all the different descriptions I've like read about it over the past.
I like your distinction of feeling being in the sentient, but I also think because it's in thinking, it's in the consciousness soul, and it's in the intellectual soul, and it's in the sentient soul. The feeling, the emotional. Well, this would be a whole conversation about what feeling is, right? Because there's feeling my way about, and then there's the sympathy and antipathy and the tension drawn between the two. Speaking of death and resurrection, it's interesting, isn't it? That there's Fichte on the left. I know I'm murdering the German of Fichte, but
No, Fichte is perfect.
Americans say. You do an ish kind of sound.
Oh,
In any case,
it's close enough.
there's Hegel on the right, and so as we mentioned, Hegel wanted to be buried next to Fichte to describe the way in which Fichte was underrated in the football match. He was the central figure, and he's the central figure for Rudolf Steiner in this because of the way Rudolf Steiner is such an adept at using these under-considered thinkers. One of the critiques he had of people of his time is that everybody had an opinion about Hegel, but nobody read Hegel. Nobody understood Hegel if they did read him. And then even more so is Fichte is lost to history almost. Yet here in Bonnie Roy, we have somebody who's determining the center of the circle as the self that is everywhere to be found, is something like a foundation of existence, and that our life is a move toward freedom in order to inhabit this primal, foundational, and final self, so to speak. And there's the cross in the middle, which is really interesting emblematically, because in a sense you could say Steiner has resurrected German idealism into something living in anthroposophy, into something living and creative, say, that is actually creating reality, and helping us to understand that is our responsibility, whether we want to do it or not, that we are affecting the world around us just by observing it, as Kate was mentioning when speaking of attention, that we change the world when we look at it, that we are part of the evolutionary process. And Steiner's work has been a resurrection of Hegel and Fichte and Kant.
You've stirred up a couple of interesting thoughts as you flesh out your thinking there, Jeff. I was drawn to something that I read a long time ago, which it's one of these bold statements that Steiner makes, and you just go, can it be? But it gains a little bit more ground when you describe it the way you just did. So what was that statement? He said that that Fichte and Hegel, they are like the rishis of the ancient Indian culture. So what he's trying to convey is this idea is these are people of earth evolution changing importance that are coming down into bodily form. They are instrumental for moving evolution of the human being, the whole human being, forward. And seeing this grave here with Fichte next to Hegel, it somehow captures a little bit of Fichte recognizing that sort of like, even though we've gone off and specialized in our own way, we're united in this grand humanity project, and he felt it so instinctively that he chose to be buried next to him. It's like it's a very poignant picture for me, what you've just presented there.
That Steiner referred to them as a sort of as rishis,
modern rishis. Yep, he was exactly.
Where is that? Do you know?
Can't remember. It's such a long time since I read it, and it's one of those things you just go, "Whoa, this is a bold statement."
I want to look into that for context, because I don't think it's he didn't just say things like that. Like, it wasn't a romantic statement. It was
no.
It was a karmic statement.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Who knows? It might have even been in the 8 sets of lectures, the karmic relationships. But I'll have a look and try to find it, and you have a look, and the first one to get there will inform each other.
All right.
Yeah, cool.
You should do yours, Angus, because I'm getting sleepy.
Okay, so I'll do that. Okay, I think this is going to be quicker because we've already covered this. I just want to make some crystal clear statements. So going back to the old format for my last pictures. So taken straight from chapter 7, Steiner says, because we have adhered strictly to this absolutely fundamental principle and have not evaluated any particular instances of knowledge in our discussion, we have transcended all one-sided worldviews. One-sidedness, as a rule, results from the fact that the inquiry, instead of first investigating the process of cognition itself, immediately approaches some object of this process. This is one of those lights that's gone off for me. I've read this series of lectures. It's GA 151, this image is taken from GA 151, and it's this perplexing idea of different worldviews. And here he's stating, like in this crystal clear way, when we recognize the activity of thinking for what it is, and how it itself is at the root of cognition in all of these different realms. And it's like there's a rough division: a materialist, spiritist, and then idealist and realist. We begin to experience in a new way how this recognition of the activity of thinking is there right in the center. And it's an activity that can go off in that direction, it can go off in that direction, it can go off in any direction that it likes. But we've identified and we've been developing our awareness of what this central activity is that creates all knowledge. And to my mind, it means that we, at some stage in the future, we're going to have to tackle. It's a short series of lectures. There are only 4 lectures in that particular series. To my mind, nobody has tackled it in a decent way, least of all somebody who claims to have done so. I'll mention no names, but 1 or 2 people will know who I'm talking about. But it would really be interesting to dig deeper into this, having found the heart, the bit in the middle there, because that's what this book, to my mind, has been about. Thoughts, comments before Kate falls asleep? Are you, Kate, gone silent? I think are you talking or I can't. Are you?
I muted myself accidentally. I love this series of lectures. This image is very helpful, as well as when we were talking about the life processes as well. It was very interesting. And I love it because Fichte talked about, he said the same thing. You could form a really good world picture by being an idealist or by being a realist, which he called a dogmatist.
Yeah.
And that's, I suppose, what cognition is finding a really good way of making it work and prioritizing certain parts of the given over others, because we can't prioritize all of it, but thinking isn't all of it because it's bringing things together. Yeah, I do remember ages ago we were talking about, I think in Philosophy of Freedom, I said, like, I feel like we come from things on different sides of a circle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is like that. I don't know where I am. I think it might be no, I'm always moving around. I don't think it's possible to be one at a time, one completely. But it's...
That lecture series goes a little bit into the question you're asking yourself just there.
Yeah. It's great the way he shows the evolution of it. It's thinking that the way that he flows into the different worldviews and how they flow into each other is thinking. It's beautiful.
Yes.
This is also where where to me again he establishes the mediating factor between rationalism and idealism. Maybe not in the sense he means rationalism here, Although maybe so. But again, to go back to Amrine, to repeat what I've mentioned last week, this is where Goethe discovers, through his subtle empiricism, discovers thinking, pure thinking, as the archetypal phenomena that is existent in the as an organizing principle in all reality. That's what he says in this work, that thinking is the organizing principle. It's an organizing principle in us, and it's an organizing principle in nature. And then Fichte discovers, through the birthing of a new sense organ, the I, right? And then what Steiner does is takes both of these one-sided worldviews and puts the self in the center as the mediating, organizing factor through thinking, the thinking self. Thinking mediates all existence is one of the things he says in the final summation.
Two things it's like follow-on thoughts to what you're saying there, Jeff. Was it Hegel that coined the term absolute idealism? Was that what he was trying to achieve?
He had the notion of the absolute idea.
Absolute idea.
Yeah, as the foundation, as the founding principle of all existence, whereas Fichte had the I as such, and Bonnie Roy.
I think these are more so like ideas that I think we're going to end up discussing in the future, because I'm not 100% clear about the terms that I'm using here. But there was my understanding was that Hegel was trying to create an absolute idealism. And what does that mean? Just literally reconciling these two opposites. So he was trying to see that. And when you read about Schelling, and I can't even remember the terms there, but this was also as like an attempt to reconcile these opposites that are going on there. So that's just an observation that some of the philosophers, they were actively or consciously trying to overcome this apparent dualism, but never finding this point that Steiner like identifies with the activity of thinking. Goethe, in my mind, is I think I would tend to be more careful about bringing in Goethe here, for the reason that it's not because of what he was doing, it's the level of consciousness at which he was doing this. And what do I mean by that? Steiner quotes Goethe often as saying, it's like, I don't think about thinking. What he did when he met Schiller was he had been instinctively doing his phenomenological research, which is the type of research that you need to do to win these true concepts. So he had a healthy scientific process. But what Schiller brought to him was the philosophical language to something that he was already doing, if you like. And in that sense, he wasn't my description. I'm not saying this is a definitive statement, but my understanding that is he was a subconscious philosopher. He was in phenomenology. He developed the scientific method, which Steiner went on to talk about multiple times and elaborate extensively on in GA 1 and 2. But all of this came from a healthy instinctual relationship to thinking, rather than a conscious awareness of what this activity of thinking was.
I totally agree with what you just said. And he was insistent that the self is not a secondary reality, that it is a primary reality, as all reality is primary. And that move put him in a unique place within human history, which is what Steiner picked up, and it speaks to the importance again to the reality of the self. It's interesting that he didn't have the self-awareness to know that it was the self that was the thing that was the well. He did describe himself as making an instrument out of himself. So I think there's more self-awareness than meets the eye, I would so to speak, but not enough to meet the eye, I would say.
Okay, next slide. Okay, we're back to this is a repetition of something. I've just brought back the football game here. That I'll read the text and then what's going on for me here. All conflicts between worldviews result from a tendency to attempt to attain knowledge of something objective, thing, I, consciousness, etc., without having first gained a sufficiently exact knowledge of what alone can elucidate all knowledge, the nature of knowledge itself and its relationship to thinking. We could add that. I want to a story. This might be a story I've told at some stage in the past. I'm not sure. When I was about 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, I'm relatively confident I have said it. When I was that age, we went past a funeral parlour in Worthing. I think I was on the way back from rugby on that day. And I commented to my father, I was like, God, I would want a crap job like that, something like that, as a teenager might do. And he calmly replied, let's be thankful that there are people that want to do that type of job. And in the attitude of soul of my father, I see reflected this same attitude a healthy attitude to all of these people who specialize in these different areas. I think I called Bacon's like Dr. Evil last time or something like that. And that's a very one-sided description of somebody who's hugely important for the understanding of the physical realm. And if one way, when I'm doing life right, according to Angus right, not according to right, according to sort of like the church or God or whatever thing, it's like external authority, but Angus's version of when he's living the type of life he should lead is, I am able to extract the valuable. I'm able to perceive the valuable in what other people are creating in life. And this is also central to the Waldorf pedagogy that we are training. So at the heart of Waldorf pedagogy is this idea that we have individuals coming to this world with their own karma, with their own strengths, and in some way they are adding to the project of life. And the school system, the educational system, is trying to support that process. And this picture is like another way of describing what is a truth for me.
Well said. I endorse that endorsement of Waldorf education.
I have not been paid to.
I would say also to go to your previous slide, and I'm learning this with my coming 13-year-old. She'll be 13 in just 14 days. in seventh grade, they're starting to learn perspective, and they're not messing around. They're not just teaching like drawing perspective. They're using words that are perspective oriented. They're using and everything up to this point as relates to perspective is supporting the idea that you can take many different perspectives on things, right? That it's important to see from another person's point of view. It's important to see in depth, right? And it's important to see things for the way they really are in their multiplicity of reality, something like that. And so it's for it to achieve that cultivation of a self that can fulfill its destiny, multiple perspectives are necessary. Overcoming one-sidedness is necessary, and that supports what you're saying as relates to both slides, actually.
Yes, and that is the central message for me of the concluding chapter. That is, thinking, the activity of thinking is that which can unify us.
And how? I mean, and I mean that in both senses of the phrase. And how, and really how it does it, which is through a moral, through thinking cognition that grasps the reality as moral ideal and motivates action that is a universalizing, has a universal impact.
And that takes us neatly into the last slide. So in his concluding remarks, he makes this observation: whenever something takes place in the universe, two things must be distinguished: the external course the event follows in space and time, and the inner law ruling it. To recognize this law in the sphere of human conduct is simply a special instance of cognition. And we've got the last 7 chapters of the philosophy of freedom in that statement, because the impact on the moral life is something that's not touched on at all in this book. What we've done in this book is we've got a far deeper grounding in the first 7 chapters of the philosophy of freedom, but so how this then impacts on ourselves. It's like the relationship of knowledge to what we do and why we do it. That's what's unpacked in the I'm simplifying a lot, but that's for me the essence of one of the things that's unpacked in the last 7 chapters of the philosophy of freedom.
Can I read what another concluding sentence that I think
go for it.
That supports that beautifully? To carry out a deed ruled by a law that lies within the one who brings it about is a deed done in freedom. To recognize the laws of one's deeds means to become conscious of one's own freedom. Thus, the process of knowledge is the process of development toward freedom. It's a question with the philosophy of freedom that I always have. Like, what's the connection between knowledge and freedom? I mean, and why is freedom necessary in order to have knowledge of the world? Right? But this special instance is the symbol, in the best sense of the word, symbol.
Yeah. And that talks to the points that that I wanted to round out for myself with. Right at the beginning of the philosophy of freedom, he talks about motives. as underlying. So like, what are these things that drive our actions? And if we can't know the source of our motives, which the pessimists, let's say, that we can't, then we can never be free. And this is why he spends 7 chapters developing like an experience of freedom through an experience of the activity of thinking, which then like informs us how it's like there are no limits to knowledge, including knowing the sources or the thinking behind your motives. What are the source of your motives? Why do you prefer to do certain things and not other things? It's this. You begin to experience it again at a deeper level. How these are integral questions, not 2 questions so like plucked out of the air, as like chucked together. It's about knowing yourself, and if you're going to know yourself, you have to know what knowledge is and where knowledge comes from. So know yourself. Okay, I'll try to know myself. What's knowledge? Oh, that's a good question. Let's start with that one.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it from me. Anybody like to conclude?
I would like to say what I've won from this particular session, through a very sleepy mind. I think the phrase thinking as the ground of being, and thinking as the law, and thinking as the factor, and those sorts of phrases that we use has connected with a reality in my concepts that it hadn't before, or it's deepened reality. And I think that that's because of our distinction between cognition, concept, idea. And I see now that I'm feeling thinking as a gift that is continually able to regenerate novel solutions, and that is why it's it's continuously able to connect things that weren't connected before, and that is why we create the world, because thinking is a reality, whether we're here or not, that it's evolving the world by making new creations, whether that's gene mutations, whether that's a embryo forming itself in this situation, in this womb, in this time. It's a new, whether it's the ability to let go of dogmatism and fanaticism in a moment and act freely for yourself or for someone else, because you realize you can, and you realize that there is a connection to be made from your deed and what the world is asking of you. So that is what I've won from this, which I think is very profound, and I'm excited to sleep on it and see what my soul will do with it. So thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's what thinking is, people. Right there. She just said it. I was here.
Is it time to press the button?
Yeah.
Good night, all.
Good night.